But if you rethink the purpose of education and say the purpose of education is to prepare young minds for these future emerging industry and give it a more future focused approach, you really then have to shift what you learn and how you learn it. And what is powerful about taking this future focused and wisdom-based education outlook is that you start to develop an education system that can contribute to human progress.
Hello and welcome to the Game Changers She Talks, brought to you by Credit Suisse. I'm Yvonne Chan. In this video series, we want to share stories of women whose lives and work experiences in the technology space will inspire young generations of female innovators and creators. Sharing their stories advances the leading and innovative ideas that they care about, creating a positive ripple effect. Today, we shine the spotlight on Goal 4, quality education. Education is the foundation of socioeconomic development and contributes to the elimination of poverty, poor health, and inequality. But just as COVID-19 has wiped out 20 years of education gains, the pandemic has also accelerated the EdTech industry's development, with more educators and students embracing digital learning. In a similar vein, as our society advances towards a more technologically advanced lifestyle that's primed for a gender-equal future, we need to make STEM for girls more accessible and eradicate the factors that discourage them. In a world of rapid change, it is clear that traditional education systems need reform to benefit all levels of society. So how can we create a future education model that is affordable, accessible, and progressive? Well, joining me to discuss this and share her story is Raya Bidshahri, the founder and CEO of revolutionary online educator, the School of Humanity. Raya is one of the world's leading experts on alternative models in education. She is also a member of the BET Global Education Council and is often described as a techno-optimist. Welcome, Raya. It's great to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Raya, you've been speaking about the future of education since a very tender young age of 16. Tell us how you got into the education space.
So I was very fortunate in high school to have been exposed to entrepreneurship and education entrepreneurship. I was part of the founding team of the first science festival when I was in high school, the first science festival in Dubai. And the goal very much there was to increase the scientific literacy of the general public. And as you can imagine, those entrepreneurial experiences and projects that I started to work on led to taking a hit on my grades. This feeling just got exacerbated as I got into university. I studied neuroscience for undergrad, but while I was doing that, I continued to work with multiple mission-driven startups, do some work as a technology journalist, and I increasingly found that there was a huge gap between what I needed to know in the workforce versus what formal education focuses on. So I got into the education space very much out of my own frustrations as a learner, as a student, with this feeling that the structures and curriculum and models of formal education was simply not preparing me for this emerging workforce.
Yeah, there is this huge gap that you talk about, right? You said there was a hit on your grades, but yet you were accumulating all this wealth of experience and insights, and it didn't seem to count. So why do you think there is this strong need to reform traditional education systems, Raya?
Well, I usually like to start with the numbers that we're seeing. So a recent study by Yale shows that 75% of students in the United States, and they surveyed tens of thousands of students, hate school and report negative feelings towards school. At the same time, another study by H&R Block shows that graduates from high school only end up using about 34% of the things they learned in high school. So way over most of the information we gain in high school actually turns out to be completely useless and impractical towards our everyday lives, which is a very inefficient way of learning if you think about it. So the way I like to kind of structure the issues we have with our existing education system is that there are issues in what we're learning in terms of the curriculum and what we focus on. There are issues in how we're learning it in terms of the passive, disengaging learning models that we have. There are issues with where learning happens in terms of forcing it into the boundaries of schools and giving the learning that happen within schools more importance. And there are issues with why we're learning. If you think about what incentivizes most learning today, it's not a desire to better oneself or better the world, but rather it's a desire to get better grades, which, as we've already discussed, can be arbitrary measures of success without any real objective value.
So focusing too much on grades can be very inefficient, like you said, and also very arbitrary. So tell us about the innovation behind future focus and wisdom-based education, because as a parent myself, I am also very interested in this topic.
Absolutely. So, if you look at the purpose of traditional education, it really, the current formal structures that we have in place emerge out of the industrial era. And the current education system emerged out of the industrial era with the purpose of creating factory style workers that could stick within tasks and could do work in the industries that emerged in that time. But if you rethink the purpose of education and say the purpose of education is to prepare young minds for these future emerging industry and give it a more future focused approach. And if you add a layer of preparing young minds and equipping them with what some futurists like Thomas Lombardo are calling wisdom and wisdom based education, you really then have to shift what you learn and how you learn it. So saying that we should be equipping youth with wisdoms might sound like a fluffy word, but futurists like Thomas Lombardo, who first coined the term wisdom based education, have broken wisdom down into subsequent parts, such as the ability to have expanded sense of self, expanded sense of time, having compassion, having an intelligently optimistic view on life, having emotional intelligence. And what is powerful about taking this future focused and wisdom based education outlook is that you start to develop an education system that can contribute to human progress. Because if you think about most of the global, local and global challenges we see today, whether it be climate change or the refugee crisis or even our response to a pandemic, you can trace all of those challenges to specific issues in the human mind and the human approach to things, whether it be an egocentric mindset, whether it be a lack of expanded sense of time. And so teaching for those things and equipping ways of tackling those things into our curriculum can help create a better society for all.
That makes so much sense. So this whole development of education to contribute to humanity's progress, how are you incorporating that into your very own School of Humanity? Tell us about the ethos there. And I know you have this thing called the mastery transcript. How is that also a more equitable approach to the traditional report card, which I used to dread getting?
Absolutely. So, with my last company, a lot of the work that we did was extracurricular. We worked with government entities, we worked with the largest providers of private school globally. And the goal there was to really fill in the gaps in the traditional curriculum that we felt like we're missing and that students need to be equipped with. But what I really started to see, or my team and I started to see, is that there were these progressive schools around the world that had already reinvented education. And so these progressive pedagogies were emerging all around the world. They were happening in small communities, but they were proven in the terms that they were often researched and studied, but also students had graduated from those high school, those kinds of pedagogies and gone off to university and had successes. But what we saw is these kinds of progressive schools were only accessible in some communities. They were not globally accessible. And at the same time, they were very expensive. So more often than not, they were wealthy families coming together to create a really kind of alternative model for their children. So at School of Humanity, we asked ourselves the question of why not take these models, these kinds of challenge-based learning, interdisciplinary learning, or project-based learning, and transition it into an online first model. So what we did is we created an incredible curriculum that's a competency-based curriculum. It's a set of competencies, mindsets, and behaviors that we want all of our graduates to have. These are informed by the needs of human progress, but they're also informed by the evolving landscape of work and the skills that are most in demand in the current workforce. And essentially, learners develop these skills by solving local and global challenges, by designing solutions to challenges, and by embarking on interdisciplinary learning paths. And on the mastery transcript, so there's an incredible consortium called the Mastery Transcript Consortium that has emerged. And what they're doing is they've created a new form of a report card, let's say. And on the mastery transcript, instead of reducing students down to single letter subjects and letters and reducing them down to that kind of simplified approach, instead, the mastery transcript captures all of the transferable skills that a learner has mastered, which
Mhm.
means a high threshold of mastery needs to have been met for those skills. And that is then tagged to a portfolio of projects that evidence those skills. So it allows for a less reductionist and more holistic overview of what a young mind is capable of. It's usually a more accurate overview.
Gosh, I'm just taking a moment to digest all that you're saying. It sounds so revolutionary, radical almost, but it's great that they're with the mastery transcript, for example, you're not just reducing a young mind to a letter, just to a grade, but focusing more on competency learning. And that is something that I would totally champion for as well. What other barriers are you hoping to overcome, or maybe goals are you aiming to achieve with the School of Humanity? I read too that half of your enrollees are also female.
Absolutely. So one of the frustrations that we had with the EdTech space, you rightfully
Mhm.
pointed out that especially during COVID, investment into EdTech and adoption of EdTech has increased dramatically.
That's right.
However, a lot of that funding goes towards the tech of EdTech and not the ed of EdTech. So
Mm.
while we're seeing a mass digitization of curriculum and pedagogy, we're not necessarily reimagining the learning experience and the education, the pedagogy itself. So that's part of the barrier we're overcoming is not just digitizing things, but actually reimagining the model itself, which is actually a huge challenge because, as you can imagine, investors in this space don't usually see companies that are not necessarily a proprietary tech play, but rather a proprietary education model play. At the same time, one of the things we did from the get-go is make sure that we are inclusive of the developing world and the emerging economy. And there's a variety of ways that we do this. So we work with sponsors as well to be able to sponsor learners who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford our programs. We also follow a sliding scale tuition model so that families can pay whatever works best with their income bracket. And as you
Excellent.
pointed out, the majority of our learners are actually girls, which we find
Yes.
really, really exciting. We think it's a huge opportunity to close the skills gap and the gender gap in emerging
Mm.
economies. And what we see often with EdTech is developing countries are usually the last to access cutting edge models. But in our case, we wanted to make sure that we have learners from those economies and countries in our very founding cohort from the very beginning.
How do you think the future of work now is impacting the future of education? And are we actually doing enough to adequately prepare our youth for a future of exponential change, Raya?
Absolutely. So we are seeing a number of different trends that are influencing the future of work. So as we know, the pandemic dramatically accelerated what was already a rise of the remote workforce.
That's right.
And the rise of the remote workforce is completely changing a couple of things. The types of skills that are most in demand is changing, right? Things like project management, time management, and even collaboration and leadership vary when you shift into a remote workforce. It changes the kinds of things employers are looking for. It also globalizes the workforce in the sense that when you apply for a job, you're no longer just competing against local talent, you're competing against global talent. So that shifts the global landscape as well. As you rightfully pointed out, the rise of exponential technologies like virtual reality, artificial intelligence, blockchain is giving host to new types of roles, new types of jobs, new types of industries very quickly. We're also seeing the rise of the creative and imagination economy, where creativity and imagination become the primary creators of value in society. This is driven by the fact that technological automation is taking over more monotonous and routine tasks, whereas more higher ordered creative tasks are left to be done more by humans. And so all of this is such a sharp contrast to the emphasis that we put in the traditional education system, where it's focused on isolated subjects, where it's focused on the kinds of tests that test whether there's a correct or wrong answer rather than creative thinking, where we still put an emphasis on in-person teaching rather than blended or online, given that we're students will be going into an online driven workforce. So we are not, for the most part, doing a good job in preparing young minds for this evolving landscape of work. And that's part of what we're trying to change at School of Humanity.
So, what other alternative education models do you envision that would help us build back better? Because you're definitely onto something with the School of Humanity.
I would love to spend some time here talking about the case studies from around the world, because I don't believe there needs to be one model that fits all. So one of the things we always tell our prospective students is School of Humanities is just one potential alternative model in a sea of other alternative models. So for
Mm.
example, in Boston, you have the New View School. They've been around for quite a while now, and they follow something called the architectural studio model. And their classrooms are just maker labs. And what they do, the students do, they follow these 2 week sprints that are interdisciplinary sprints where they just learn by solving a challenge. That challenge can be redesigning the public transportation system in Boston, or it can be something else. And they basically graduate similarly with a skill transcript and a portfolio transcript. And by the way, they've had students get into MIT, Harvard, and beyond.
Whoa, whoa,
Similarly, in the
whoa.
Agora School, yeah, it's pretty cool, right? It just shows you it's
Yeah.
not that much of a risk to go into a school like this. You also have the Agora School in the Netherlands, and they are a really cool school. They're an in-person school that has no classrooms. It's completely open spaces and open learning environments. You're more likely to sit in a circle than you are to sit in like a lecture-like setting. And they call their teachers coaches because they're there to coach and facilitate the personalized learning path. Every student has their own curriculum, which is really exciting. So for me, those are just some examples of the types of models that exist. There are commonalities between them, but there's also things that make them different. And I truly believe that in the next decade, these alternative models will no longer be alternative. They will become mainstream.
Mainstream. Yeah, that sounds so exciting. I want to circle back to what you study, neuroscience. That's really interesting. How do you think neuroeducation can impact teaching and learning?
So we're seeing the rise of a field, an interdisciplinary field, let's say, called neuroeducation, which is neuroscientists bringing in the latest insights of the brain, about the brain, and collaborating with educationists to design models of learning that are informed of what we know about the brain. It's also representing the shift of treating education not like an art, but as a science, and actually using the scientific method to research what are the pedagogies that work best in the classroom and systemically try to understand how do people learn best. Now, some of the key insights that we found that are really notable. One of my favorites is that they found that teaching young minds about the brain and about the fact that the brain is malleable and neuroplastic, which means that you can constantly improve and make new connections in your brain, can actually improve learning. So they did a study where a group of seventh graders were told, the brain is a neuroplastic, malleable thing that can constantly improve all throughout your life. And another group that were told that, the brain is static, that you can't actually change things. And the
So that
group
your
that
left or
knew
right brain and that's it, right?
exactly, exactly. And the group that actually believed, rightfully so, a neuroplasticity did better in their test results and they learned better. So that mindset shift is fascinating, I think. We also have a lot of insights coming in from studies about the role of emotion on learning. We know that negative emotions like fear or stress can have a detrimental effect on the learning experience, whereas positive emotions such as awe can have a positive experience. So that shifts the way we structure our entire education system, really, and the well-being component. We also have plenty of research to show that experiential and problem-based learning and project-based learning are far more effective than lecture-based learning. So all of these new progressive pedagogies aren't just kind of hippie progressive pedagogies. They're supported by the latest research in neuroscience.
That is really so fascinating. I'm hoping the parents who are tuning in are also seeing all these little having these little light bulbs go off in their head. On a personal note now, I want to ask you too, Raya, you serve on the board of many EdTech companies. Have you ever felt that your youth and your gender, did it ever stand in the way of you getting your ideas across? What kind of challenges did you face as a young female entrepreneur in this field?
I think I've been very fortunate to have always had excellent mentors, advocates, and champions. And that's part of why we want to replicate that with the young women that we have at School of Humanity. But of course, there are the challenges. You, of course, will end up in situations where you're the only woman in the group, and at the same time you're the youngest person in the room, and that tends to happen even now, quite often. And I think some of the challenges I faced as well were internal challenges. We know for a fact that women are more likely to feel imposter syndrome, the feeling that I don't deserve to be here, I'm not good enough for this, right? And it's a very commonly felt emotion. And the way I think I've learned to tackle this, and I constantly try to, encourage other young women at our school and beyond to tackle this, is really to surround yourself with the right mentors, the right advocates, and the right kind of supportive community. I also believe that thought leadership in the form of writing articles or doing things like this can really help establish a strong brand that can make up for not being taken seriously as a young woman. So I think those are just some strategies that have really helped me, that we try to embed into our education system, actually, to help other young people as they advance in their careers.
Yeah, that's really sound advice indeed. I know you, at School of Humanity, some of your subject matter experts might be referred to as mentors. You're big on mentorship, aren't you, for in terms of giving access for equal opportunities for both genders?
Absolutely. So we actually don't have teachers. We have at School of Humanity, we have learning facilitators, and they're called so because they facilitate a personalized learning experience for the students, and a very interactive one. And then on the other hand, we have what we call industry mentors. So these are mentors that are subject matter specialists. So for example, if you are on the designing space settlement path, learning path, your mentor might be an actual astronaut in training, which is the case at the school. Or if you're on the future of money path,
That's
your mentor might be
amazing.
someone who's an expert in cryptocurrencies. And these mentorship sessions are really open ended. It's an opportunity for a learner to get feedback on their work, but it also becomes personalized to what your goals are. And what is really powerful, I believe, about mentorship, especially when it comes to closing any kind of wealth gaps or income gaps or even gender gaps, is there's no denying that the network you have access to gives you a huge leg up in life. And students that come from wealthier backgrounds, more privileged backgrounds, naturally have access to a wider network, either through their parents or through the schools that they go to. Whereas what we're trying to also do is give young learners in low income backgrounds or developing regions access to incredible industry mentors who are leading the fields that they're in, and allow them to have that one-on-one time, not just to get knowledge and wisdom and feedback, but to continue that relationship that can one day maybe help them in life. It's someone else that they can go to when they're sending out their resumes for job applications. So I truly believe mentorship and the personal connections and guidance can truly help close lots of different gaps in society.
Yeah, and an open-ended mentorship as well. That is really,
Yeah.
really valuable. Raya, you're often described as a techno optimist. So are you excited about what the future holds for young girls in tech?
I really am. I really am. I think, funnily enough, I don't want to describe it as a problem, but one of the questions we ask ourselves is how can we bring in more boys to have a balanced cohort? Because we have so many amazing girls applying
Mm.
from all around the world. And it makes me really excited for the future of young girls in tech and women in tech, because I think more often than not, women are more effective collaborators and leaders. We're intuitively more empathetic. And that combined with technological skills, I think can make incredible, well-rounded leaders in technology. So for me, I'm really excited. And we're also seeing a lot of improvements in terms of data and closing the gaps around girls. And we're also seeing a lot of amazing role models for those young women as well, which I'm really excited about.
And sometimes it really is also about getting allies, right, amongst males to fight for better gender parity. So, Raya, what key message then would you like to leave for our female viewers today? Because I feel like you've shared really wonderful insights about what you're doing in the edtech space and also yourself as a role model for many to look up to today.
The key message I would leave with our female viewers is to really surround yourself with the right champions, advocates, and allies. So if you're ever feeling discriminated against, or if you feel like you constantly have to prove yourself, then you're in the wrong environment. Because I guarantee you there are environments out there that will nurture you, respect you, and continue to support you. So that's really the key message I would like to leave for young women, and also to encourage all women to participate in thought leadership and to also build their personal brand, because that can go a long way in establishing yourself as a leader.
So build your personal brand and surround yourself. Um, Choose the right environment, surround yourself with the right champions, advocates, and allies. That's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Raya. I think there's really little doubt that attracting more women and girls, as well as other underrepresented groups, into STEM programs will help to make the workforce of our future even stronger and more prepared. Without diverse groups in science, the world may miss out on valuable innovations and ideas that alternate perspectives bring to the table. And it's great to know that alternative platforms like yours, Raya, is revolutionizing future education and also changing mindsets around what it means to truly excel. And you've really given us a wonderful reminder today that education has the power to uplift all groups of society, especially women. Thank you so much, Raya.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the excellent questions.
Thank you. Well, you've been watching another episode of the Game Changers She Talks. That was Raya Bidshahri. We'll see you next time.